Big 12 Radio, Big 12 Today. We go around the world and really go to Provo, Utah, where we're talking now with our buddy Greg Wrubell from the BYU Radio Network. James Westling, Ari Tepkin, Big 12 Radio, presented by Modelo. Greg, how are you?
Ari and James, I'm very well. Good to be with you as always.
Yeah, it's fun to have you on. Appreciate it, and especially in advance of BYU and Utah in Provo tomorrow. And I mean, it's clear this is a rebuilding year, if you will, for Alex Jensen in Utah, and certainly is not the case for BYU with just 2 losses so far. What stands out to you about how the Cougs have started their year?
Well, it's tough to have gone much better than 16-2
Right.
with the schedule BYU has handled. So I think you have to be really impressed with how BYU got to this point. Especially, AJ DeBonsa kind of speaks for himself. He's a big piece to the puzzle. Richie Saunders and Rob Wright, the third, complete the big three. But it's not the deepest BYU team, and so they've kind of had to ride those big three pretty hard, and they did so pretty successfully to get to 16-1. This loss this past Saturday at Texas Tech kind of showed the margin for error for BYU where it's at. The big three have to be excellent. If one of them happens to be off, you can't have any of the other starters, kind of have an off night, which I think is what happened in Lubbock. And the bench is giving BYU just enough this season. But the loss of Dawson Baker and Nate Pickens to season-ending injuries and surgeries really changed the look of this team. The roster was constructed where there was depth at every position. And when you lose Dawson Baker and Nate Pickens, you lose 2,000-plus career points that you don't have access to anymore. And they really struggled to find adequate replacements for those two guys. And so it's going to be a very starter-heavy team, a very starter-centric team, a very big three-centric team. But it just means they all have to really be on every night, and you really can't have any off nights. And I think that's what happened in Lubbock, and that's one of the reasons Texas Tech got them this past weekend.
Well, those big three have been phenomenal. It's the number one scoring trio in the country, at least it was as of a couple of days ago. Where have you seen the most growth among those three guys?
Richie Saunders, was kind of a go-to guy last year for BYU, and he's had to kind of maybe readjust his fit a little bit, and didn't take too long though. I think he and AJ and Rob play so well together. It helps that Rob's your pure point guard, Richie's kind of your versatile wing, and AJ can do it all over the floor. And I think those three pieces really fit nicely together. And so they really didn't have a great period of adjustment to kind of working together to the point right now, guys, where they're fifth, sixth, and seventh now in scoring in league play. They're all averaging 20-plus points per game in league play. And that's kind of what this team is going to need from those guys. This past Saturday in Lubbock was the first game where BYU had 0 bench minutes from the guards. And that's why you're seeing Rob Wright right now sitting at second in the Big 12 in conference play in minutes per game, with Christian Anderson being first. I think Christian and Rob are going to be 1-2 all season long in that category because they kind of have to be in league play. Texas Tech is built similar to BYU in that they get almost nothing off the bench. In fact, of the 361 teams the NCAA ranks, Texas Tech is 355th in bench points per game.
Wow.
They simply don't go there for that. The starting five get it done for Texas Tech. And BYU's built in a very similar way. The Cougs are also in the 300s in bench points per game. But that just means you can't have, Kaba have a 0-point game in Lubbock. You can't have Moo Davis, go 0 for 6 from the 3-point line, which happened in Lubbock. And what Texas Tech got was the 5 starters all contributing. And BYU had 2 of the big 3 with good nights, 1 an off night, and then the other 2 guys had off nights as well. And so I think Texas Tech and BYU are similar in how they're built. In fact, it's interesting. Of the top 6 teams in the Big 12, 5 of them are in the bottom 100 nationally in bench points per game. Houston, Iowa State, Kansas, BYU, Texas Tech, they're all built very starter-centrically right now, with Arizona being the lone exception. And Arizona's depth, I think, is the reason you see the Wildcats sitting at the top of the Big 12 as they are. Point being, for BYU, their starting 5 just kind of have to be on every night. And then if they're not, I think you see a little bit of exposure like you saw maybe in Lubbock.
Is that, do you think, I don't want to say it's by design, but, do you think that's something that could develop more positively over the course of the year in terms of depth?
I don't know if it's. I mean, they're getting enough, I think, from the bigs in terms of bench
It's the
play, and that's
guards.
Mihailo
Yeah.
Boskovic. Yeah, that's Boskovic, Boop, and Abdullah Ahmed. They call him Beto. Those three guys are going to give BYU just what they need, I think, from the front court on the bench. It's really guard scoring. And without Baker, without Pickens, again, massive losses, guys. I don't think it gets talked about enough what that meant to this team when those two guys were lost for the year. That brings you down to Tyler Morus and Alexei Kostic and Dominique Diomande. And neither of those guys is averaging better than 3 points a game right now. And none of them played in Lubbock. So the comfort level isn't there right now in a close game to go to those guys. In fact, the Lubbock game, the Texas Tech game, was the first game Tyler Morus did not play all year. He was brought in from Idaho as kind of a 3 point specialist, but he's shooting 28% from the 3 point line right now. And so, I'm not sure it's going to be there. It'd be nice if it does develop, but you've got a decent sample size right now to kind of see what they've got. I just think it's unfortunate because I think Morus and Kostic were going to be, the 3 and 4 guards off the bench, not the 1 and 2 guards off the bench. That's kind of where they got to. And Tyler could still have his time. He's had flashes here, but I think it's been because he's not playing a lot of minutes. It's been really hard to get into a flow. Missed the first 3 or first couple 3, and he's usually out of the game. So it's been tough that way.
Greg, when I look at BYU's upcoming schedule, Utah tomorrow, this is the rematch from January 10th, just 2 weeks ago, and I know that game was a little bit closer than BYU fans would have liked. But then on Monday, you've got Arizona, and then at Kansas next Saturday, at Oklahoma State, Houston at home on February 7th. What is your outlook, and what does BYU hope to gain during that stretch in terms of, just a gauntlet of a schedule, and then what we might learn about BYU?
Yeah, BYU was given kind of a manageable start to the year. Their first 4 games in league were all against bottom half teams. No disrespect, but it was K-State, Arizona State, TCU, and Utah. And so they were given that start to the year, and they took care of business, 4-0. Well, then things got real in Lubbock, right? And they continue to get real here over the next couple of weeks, as you just talked about. And 3 of the next 4 opponents after Utah will be in the top 17 right now in KenPom. So we see how it's going to go. So at 4-1 in conference, what would it take to get you to? So if you're 12-6 in the Big 12, are you a pretty good team? Absolutely. That would take you going 8-5 in your next 13 games. 7-6 puts you at 11-7. 11-7 is still pretty good. I'm not sure it's top 4 good, but it's still pretty good and probably gets you in the NCAA tournament comfortably. So, a 7-6 and 11-5, a 7-6 or an 8-5 over the next 13 games to close the conference campaign still means BYU is a very good team. That still means you're taking 5 or 6 losses. But that's life in the Big 12, and so I don't think you can sweat too much, if you do lose at Kansas, or if you do drop a game to Houston, or do drop a game to Arizona. Just win the games you're expected to win, and hopefully get a couple of the home games in the ones that are tougher. But I really do believe that an 11-7, 12-6 Big 12 team is still a very, very good and clearly very NCAA tournament-worthy team. I think it's going to be a race for the 4 spot, guys. I think, not that you can concede it, but you could see Arizona, Texas Tech, and Houston being 1, 2, 3 in some order. I think it's going to come down to BYU, Kansas, and Iowa State for that 4 spot, which means the coveted double bye in Kansas City. The 2 teams that don't get it are still going to be top 6 teams the way I look at it, and I think the top 6 will sail into the NCAA tournament. Once you get to 7 and 8, a little more of a conversation, but I think you have an idea right now who those top 6 teams are going to be, with West Virginia, on the perimeter, kind of saying we might still be something here. So let's see how things shake out, for the next month for them. But top 4 is where you want to be. Get the double bye, and I think it's going to be a real solid race for that number 4 spot. The game tomorrow that you started with, James, you can't look past it, right? Because it is Utah. Yes, they're the lowest ranked net team, the lowest ranked KenPom team. They're last in the standings right now. But as far as BYU is concerned, it's still the Utah game. And the game in Salt Lake City was no cakewalk. It was a 13-point lead in the back half of the second half for BYU, and that thing got down to 1 in the closing minutes. And the Cougs had to really find some clutch performances to close that thing out, because there were free throw misses, there were front end misses, there were turnovers, things kind of melted down, and the Cougs have had difficult losses up there the last 2 times they were up there. So things were kind of happening again. So for them to pull that out was impressive, but it was a very close game after losing a 13-point lead. So you don't want to look past Utah, but it is a quad 3 game. And Kevin Young's never lost a quad 3 game since he's been the head coach at BYU. He's 8-0 in quad 3, and tomorrow is a quad 3 game, but it is Utah. And that McHenry, Terrence Brown duo in the backcourt is as exciting a guard tandem as the Big 12 has. There may not be enough around them as a team, but Brown went for 33 in Manhattan this week, midweek, and he scored 25 against BYU on the Hill. So anytime you get guys who are that incendiary, you have to kind of, hope that you've got enough to kind of match their firepower.
One football question for me, Greg. Based on what BYU brings back and, I guess what Texas Tech doesn't, should BYU be the favorite in the Big 12 next year?
I don't know. I guess I've been following it just enough to know that Texas Tech still did some good portal work, right?
Sure.
And so I don't know that their cupboard got bare by any stretch. I seem to have noted more prominent defensive line signees, and D-line was where Texas Tech showed its worth last year and showed it was really a separator, I think, on the D-line from a lot of teams last year. But I wouldn't argue the point that a rematch between Texas Tech and BYU in Arlington would be, the odds-on scenario right now.
Right.
Because BYU does bring back so much. Yeah, you lose Jay Hill, but Kalani Sitake still had, his imprint on that defense. And Kelly Papinga was a big part of executing that defense as well. And so when you elevate Kelly to defensive coordinator, again, Kalani's still overseeing that thing, and he was a defensive coach for all those years before he got to BYU. I think it's a big loss. I would have liked to have kept Jay Hill, clearly, but I don't think BYU's left wondering how to play defense in 2026. That said, as many players as BYU brought back, everybody deciding to quote unquote run it back, as the kids say these days. How do you not like the prospects for BYU based on all the weapons they have returning, including your Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year in LJ Martin and Bear Bachmeier at quarterback? So. I think there's a lot of optimism that BYU can not take any steps backward here in 2026 and ideally get back to Arlington again. And it's kind of been a step-by-step process for BYU in the Big 12 through 3 years. The first year, didn't have a winning record in conference. The next year, best regular season record in conference, but didn't get to the title game. The next year, best record in college, next to the best record in conference, and got to the title game in Arlington. And then hopefully in year 4, they'll find a way to get over the hump and win a Big 12 title. But it has been nice to kind of see the incremental progress for BYU in the league.
Who's the number one transfer that BYU's brought in? Have they been very active in the portal?
The Casper kid from Oregon is an interesting prospect at wide receiver. So I like what they could have there. I think you got to go with Katie Ulave, the linebacker from Cal. Probably ends up as the most prominent transfer for BYU in. I think he's probably seen as one of the best backers in the portal, and BYU got him.
Greg Wrubell, voice of BYU. Enjoy the game tomorrow, and we'll catch up with you again soon, buddy. Thank you.
All right, James. Always a pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Greg.
Greg Wrubell joining us here on Big 12 Radio. This is Big 12 Today, presented by Modelo. And, one of the big football games for BYU next year, and one of the games we highlighted yesterday was BYU Week 7 hosting Notre Dame. And, James, when you look at it, Notre Dame's schedule next year.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, Rice, Michigan State, Purdue, North Carolina, Navy, Miami, Boston College, SMU, Syracuse, Stanford, BYU. So they're on their next year's schedule have 4 teams that finished over 500. SMU, Miami, Navy, and BYU.
Yeah, and they have 8 teams on their schedule that had 8 or more losses this past season. So they went 4-8 or worse, 8 teams on that cupcake schedule.
So BYU may be one of the few chances to knock Notre Dame out of the playoff race.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that game might be bigger for Notre Dame than it is for BYU in terms of what's at stake in that game, because if BYU were to run the table, let's say, in the Big 12, they don't play Texas Tech, and their only loss was Notre Dame, that's a win-win for BYU. You lose that game, you're still winning. And in Provo, love it for the Cougars. Love the spot they're going to be in.
That's James Westling. I'm Ari Tepkin. This is Big 12 Today on Big 12 Radio. The final whistle on the way next, including a familiar face in the AFC Championship. It's Big 12 Today, Big 12 Radio. Heard on TuneIn, watched on Big 12 Studios, presented by Modelo.